Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. This is the first of our regular seminars during the coming term, and we are hoping to make the transition to what we hope will be a post-COVID world in which we'll be having hybrid events, an audience in person here at the Faraday Institute, and you watching on this live streamed program. So today, we're having this experiment where we have the pleasure also of having remote speakers, and in that way we're able to engage internationally distinguished speakers from around the world. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming one of these internationally respected speakers in Professor Sibel Eduran. Professor Eduran is Director of Research in the Department of Education at Oxford University and also a professor at the University of Oslo. She's a prolific and a distinguished researcher in the field of science education, and she's currently the president of the European Science Education Research Association, as well as being the editor-in-chief of the journal Science and Education, as well as being an editor for the International Journal of Science. She's worked in the USA and in Ireland and in the United Kingdom with research on epistemic practices of science and education. And her work on argumentation in particular has received international recognition by awards from the National Association for Research in Science Teaching and the European Association of Science Editors. She's also interested in the personal development of science teachers. So today she'll be teaching us something of her work on argumentation in this area of science and religious education, involving both teachers and pupils. And we look forward very much to learning more. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Eduran.
Thank you very much, Paul. Welcome, everybody. I would like to start by thanking the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion in inviting me to deliver this talk. I really appreciate to be in the presence of such distinguished colleagues interested in the interface of science and religion. I will try to share my slides. I hope that you can see my slides. Yes. I'm assuming that this is visible now. So my talk is going to focus on teaching and learning of science and religion in schools. Particularly in the context of argumentation and science and religious education. I will be presenting some work from a funded research and development project that has been supported by the Templeton World Charity Foundation as part of their Big Questions in Classrooms scheme. And this is a project that has taken place at the Department of Education at Oxford for 3 years. So let me just start by providing an outline for the presentation. I'll start with a rationale for infusing argumentation in science and religious education. I will explain this later, but when I talk about argumentation, I don't mean a war between science and religion. There's a particular sense of argumentation that I will be referring to, but I'll explain that in a minute. And as I said earlier, I will be drawing on the Oxford Argumentation in Religion and Science project. In particular, I'll present some of the research that we've been doing about the curriculum context of RE and science with respect to argumentation. We've been working with science teachers and pupils in secondary schools and fostering collaboration between science and RE teachers. So I will briefly mention the continuous professional development agenda that we have developed as part of the project. And then I'll focus on some of the research outcomes in terms of engagement of the teachers and the pupils, and then conclude with and provide some implications of this line of work. So I think if you're here, you are already very much interested in big questions that pertain to both science and religion. Big questions such as how and why life originated on Earth. Do animals have consciousness? So fairly philosophical, theological questions, but also questions that might have to do with socio-scientific issues that draw on political, moral, economic, medical aspects of contemporary societies. We're at the moment, we're hearing a lot of debates about masks, about COVID. And so some of the big questions that accompany our contemporary world require a certain type of reasoning that gets people to distinguish between justified claims and unjustified claims. And argumentation in this sense is about the ability to coordinate knowledge using justified conclusions, justification of knowledge claims with evidence and reasons. And this is, again, it's not a luxury in contemporary societies. It's almost a necessity these days to be able to distinguish justified claims from non-justified claims, because we seem to be living in an age of misinformation, and the misinformation can be about a whole range of things, including scientific information, religious information, and all sorts of other information that touch on everyday people's lives. So argumentation in that sense is about fostering of critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills. And these kinds of skills are being required by society and workplaces by a whole range of stakeholders, including educators, business leaders, academics, governmental agencies. And there is a growing international movement in fostering critical thinking skills to equip learners for acquiring jobs in rapidly changing digital societies and knowledge economies. And some of these skills require interdisciplinary engagement and cross-cultural and cross-subject consultations. Now, critical thinking and interdisciplinarity problem solving are all related to a sense of argumentation. And I wanted to highlight that this issue of interdisciplinarity or cross-subject conversations isn't just an academic or a policy. There are already existing organizations and committees that are problem solving. I came across this news here about a German state forming an interdisciplinary coronavirus consultation committee. And in this committee, there were health professionals and scientists and public health professionals about a whole range of issues related to the pandemic. But they also had philosophers, historians, theologians, jurists, because I think the committee recognized that the problem that we're facing with the pandemic is one that is fairly complex, and it requires investigation and interrogation from a whole range of perspectives. So the context, the broader context for argumentation in society is that we're really dealing with individuals, future stakeholders in society who need to be equipped with types of reasoning and ways of reasoning across different disciplinary boundaries. So in our work, we've used a particular definition of argument and argumentation, particularly British-born American philosopher Stephen Toulmin's model of argument. And I'm not going to get into the details of this, but just to clarify my definition of argument in this presentation. So Toulmin talked about argumentation in terms of having different features that include claims, data, warrants, backing, rebuttals, and qualifiers. And essentially, he indicated that each field or a domain can have specific features of arguments that relate to the epistemology of that discipline or the domain, and that there might be similarities between different domains in terms of argumentation. So those would be field dependent, similar features, and also field independent or field invariant features of arguments. So this is an area where we can begin to explore what could be potential similarities and differences in terms of arguments in science and religion. So in the context of the funded research project, we've worked with a team of colleagues focusing on science education and religious education, who also have had experiences in professional development of science and religious education teachers, as well as research in science and religious education. So here I have the pictures of the project team of the ORS project. So the main goals of the project was to develop reciprocal relationships and mutual exchange by bringing together some science and religious education teachers, and to explore avenues of cross-disciplinary innovation. We wanted to also build expertise and capacity building activities in science and religious education, for example, by supporting doctoral students and postdoctoral researchers to develop expertise in this area of research in education. And so we've engaged with the project teachers and pupils and teacher educators and academics and a whole range of stakeholders that we've interacted with across the duration of the project, which again was a 3-year project, and we've recently concluded the project. In terms of the research design, we had several research questions. I know that this is a lot to take in all at once. I'll just very quickly mention some of the key questions that we have addressed and the methodological approaches that we have used, just to give you a sense of the breadth of the project. Obviously, I cannot detail every single aspect of the project in this presentation, but just to give you the overview, we wanted to explore how argumentation is situated in science and religious education, how teachers of both subjects might make pedagogical decisions in teaching argumentation, and more importantly, in our case, how can we foster collaboration between science and RE teachers in England to foster in their own students how to engage with argumentation. So we've done, we've used a range of methodological approaches, including questionnaires, interviews, document analysis, and I will be showing you some of the outcomes of this research in this presentation. We have developed quite a few resources, including video-based resources of teachers teaching argumentation, and sometimes collaboratively teaching across science and RE. I will share the link to the website at the end of my presentation, where you can access references to our publications so that you can find out more about the different aspects of the project. So let me just start with the curriculum context to set the scene for this kind of work. So one of the things that we've done in the project was, first of all, to investigate if there is argumentation in curricula. So argumentation is defined as justification of claims with evidence and reasons, and more in detail in terms of the Toulmin's framework. So how is argumentation situated in curricula? What is the purpose of argumentation, and how is it conceptualized in science and RE curricula? Well, one of the things that we've learned very quickly is that RE is quite a complex subject in England. And one of the complications has to do with the fact that there is no single national curriculum, but there are different regional and local syllabi, some of which you can see here. But when we have looked at the details of these syllabi, we had a sample of 35, because I think there were about 150 across all of England. We traced the use of the word argument and derivatives of the word argument, or arguing, or argue, or anything related to reasons and evidence and justification. So some of the key terminology related to argumentation. And in the RE syllabi, for example, from Leicestershire and Oxfordshire, we found a lot of references that would be alluding to or explicitly referring to argumentation. For example, in the Oxfordshire agreed syllabus, you can see the reference to formulating reasoned opinions and arguments. In the Leicestershire agreed syllabus, you can see one of the statements asking the students to give an account of God's existence using a rational argument. So this seems to be, the reference to argumentation and argumentation related terminology seems very prevalent in the RE syllabi in England. When we look at the science national curriculum at Key Stage 3, which was the main focus of our project age group, and I have to say in parenthesis, this was for a reason, because we wanted to relieve the teachers from exam pressures later on, just so that they can have more space for collaboration and innovation and creativity in their collaboration. So, but some of the teachers ended up doing some work with Key Stage 4 as well. But in the context of Key Stage 3 science program of work in the science curriculum, there's a component called Working Scientifically. And within this document, you might find some references like present reasoned explanations, explaining data, evaluate data. There is no reference at all to argumentation or argument or any other derivative of the word argue. So this is quite an interesting contrast, and it's finding in itself in our project that whilst in RE syllabi there is quite a lot of emphasis on argumentation, in the science curriculum nationally there isn't much of an emphasis on argumentation, which is quite a which is an interesting finding, but also quite an alarming finding that for a subject like science, which you would imagine would be would foster evidence-based reasoning or justification of claims with evidence and reasons, that there isn't any explicit and direct reference to argumentation. In terms of with the backdrop of the curriculum context, we wanted to work with science and RE teachers to develop strategies with them to teach argumentation in their lessons, and also to foster cross-subject collaboration between science and RE curricula. So we've brought together about 30 teachers, 29 teachers, and some of the teachers moved on to different roles and so on, but originally 30 teachers from 15 schools. And we've planned to do 6 workshops with them, and we have done 6 workshops. The pandemic had some effect on how we've engaged with the teachers. I'll explain that in a minute. But in terms of working with the teachers, we relied on bringing the teachers together to build a common grounds for collaboration and finding feasible ways of working together. So I always get nostalgic about sharing photos from our initial workshops when we started the project, when we could actually meet in person, because towards the end of the CPD, the Continuous Professional Development Program, we ended up meeting online, which had its pros and cons. But here you see some pictures of our earlier workshops with the teachers. And we had a series of workshops where the teachers would come together and we would have a particular agenda in each workshop. For example, exploring similarities and differences about arguments in science and RE. In between workshops, they would go back to their schools. They would think about how they could potentially collaborate. Most of the teachers were in the same school. In some cases, it wasn't possible to have a science and an RE teacher from the same school, so we ended up pairing teachers across schools. But in any case, the teachers worked in different ways to infuse argumentation in their lessons. So in the workshops, we wanted to promote the teachers' understanding of argumentation, but the value of argumentation for their subject as well. Because again, for RE, this may have been fairly straightforward as a strategy because it is such an important, prevalent part of the curriculum. But for science, it was a different matter. So it was really important for us to foster the recognition of the importance of argumentation. I should say also that between the workshops and when we went into schools to collect data from the lessons, the project team also was quite keen to support the teachers. So we've made visits to the schools to link up with the teachers and to support them as part of their professional development. Now, in terms of their collaboration, the teachers did a whole range of things. For example, they co-planned and co-taught lessons in an interdisciplinary issue. Sometimes they just discussed a particular approach and a pedagogical framework to use in both activities, but they taught separately. So there was a whole range of how the teachers collaborated. And this was one of the outcomes of our project. We saw what is possible and maybe what is not in teachers' collaboration in the school environment, which I should say, I mean, I have to emphasize that there's very little collaboration between science and RE teachers in schools. they practically don't ever talk to each other. So this alone, however they integrated argumentation in their teaching and however they collaborated to do what, it was an important outcome for our project. But let me just give you one example of what one pair of teachers did, just to exemplify their collaboration. So for example, there was a particular pedagogical strategy of PEE, make your point, give your evidence, explain your evidence. So both science and RE teachers use the same framework to construct some lesson resources that would be specific to their subject, but also the same structure to lead up to a joint assignment that would infuse science and RE in one assignment for both subjects. So this was one way of for the teachers to collaborate, where they brought this coherence between their subjects and with a very specific focus on a pedagogical framework of PEE, particularly in relation to writing. So writing of arguments using this framework. In working with teachers, we've generated some examples and used some examples that we've been doing in other projects on argumentation. So we've shared some pedagogical strategies and resources with the teachers, but the teachers again themselves have produced their own resources separately and together, and they use a range of strategies. And some of these strategies, as well as their implementation in their classrooms, have been video recorded, and we have some examples on our website where you can view how the teachers have used them and taught with them. So I'll move on to the research findings now and start with the findings on teachers, about teachers, and then I'll focus on pupils later on. So one of the things that we did in the project was to ask the teachers how often they think they use strategies that promote argumentation in their lessons. So strategies like group discussions, debates, checking students' evidence, anticipating counter arguments, promoting discussions in lessons. So because clearly, if there are no specific approaches, pedagogical approaches to promote argumentation, it's very unlikely that there will be argumentation in their lessons. So this was self-reported. We literally just asked the teachers to say how often they think that they use a series of strategies such as these. And one of the outcomes of this was that there was a statistically significant difference between what the RE teachers reported and the science teachers reported in terms of the use of group discussions and debates in favor of the RE teachers. The RE teachers were reporting to be using significantly more debates and group discussions in their lessons. And again, this is maybe in some respect, in contrast to the curriculum context, it may not be surprising because the argumentation is a part of their syllabi. But in terms of science teaching and learning, it again points to a significant shortcoming in the teaching of science when there may not be as many interactive strategies being used in lessons to promote discussion and debate. We've looked at the teachers' views about argumentation as well. We've asked the teachers what they think about argumentation and its teaching. And I'm only pointing to some of the findings, by the way. So I'm highlighting some of the papers that we have published as a result of the project, and the full list will be on our website again. But just to sort of pinpoint a few themes from our data. So in terms of teachers' views, both science and RE teachers see argumentation as a way of justifying claims, so they seem to share that view. And they both cohorts emphasize the ability to draw on a range of sources to support claims. And they both identify the skill of argumentation as an important general skill. Where they seem to differ is that science teachers tend to emphasize the right from the wrong information. This seemed to be very important for the science teachers, whereas the RE teachers were more relativist in their views in terms of, what is a better argument, what is a worse argument, and they did not seem to be that concerned about the right from the wrong information. I think this just points to some of the differences that there might be in terms of the norms of the subject But nevertheless, if we're going to be engaging with teachers to teach argumentation, it's probably a good idea to recognize the nuances in how teachers of both subjects deal with argumentation. We've also looked at the instructional practices of teachers. Here you see a pair's approaches and the pedagogical strategies that they use in their lessons. So a comparable lesson between a pair of collaborating teachers, we see that the RE teachers utilize more meta-level statements about argumentation, statements where they're actually reflecting on the process of argumentation, or writing of explaining the writing of the role of writing in learning, or pointing to the need for evaluation of an argument. So again, the RE teachers were very resourceful in bringing in meta-level statements about the process of argument and argumentation. And so we've seen some differences in terms of the teachers' pedagogical practices in teaching argumentation. Nevertheless, I think the teachers in our project appreciated the opportunity to collaborate. They indicated that it was an effect, the project helped them to bring down subject barriers. And these are quotes from science and RE teachers. So they appreciated being exposed to wealth of experiences and getting different perspectives, being able to have the conversations with the subject, the colleagues of the other subject. We've also asked them to rate the project and evaluate the project, and the majority of the teachers found that the project met their expectations and it was an engaging project for them. So, and the fact that they would recommend the project resources and activities to others. And this was all done anonymously, obviously, but nevertheless, it was very encouraging for us that the teachers were pleased with the project at the end of the project. I'm going to move on to the research findings on the pupils now. So in terms of the pupils' argumentation, we've done quite a few different, we've approached this from different ways. For one approach was to design tasks that would have a religious education component only, science component only, and a mixed science and religious education component. And here we use Toulmin's framework to create a set of statements where the students would be, for example, put in a position to identify a claim, identify evidence, constructing a comparative argument. So the details are in this paper that I'm highlighting here. So there was a consistent and a coherent key across the three tasks so that we could compare how the students were performing in either of these contexts. And the outcome of this research was that a significant number of the students were actually performing better in the science context as opposed to the RE context. So this was quite an interesting outcome for us. And I'm not entirely sure what to attribute this to, but this is one area where we need to explore further in more detail how what we can actually attribute such differences, particularly because the science students were not exposed to argumentation as often. So it could partly be due to the fact that they had limited exposure previously, so the uptake for them was more. But that's just a speculation at this point in time, and we would need to investigate that further. Another aspect of the work that we've done with the students was to actually put some of the big questions on the table, literally, and to give the students claims such as the ABCD in this slide that you can see. So claims such as God created humans, there was no evolution, there was evolution, God had some part to play in the process, and so on. And we also gave them a set of statements, what we called evidence cards, and that would support either of those four potential claims that they could engage with. And there would be evidence supporting either of those claims. And so we've looked at how the students engaged with coordinating the evidence with the claims and discussing them individually. And we had a whole series, we audio recorded their discussions and their reflections. And one of the things that one of the outcomes of this part of the project was that about 60 to 70% of the students, and we had several hundred, I believe it was about close to 300 students, they identified the evidence cards correctly. So majority of them identified the cards correctly. In terms of where we would anticipate the evidence cards to go. However, we also noticed that when we looked at their reasoning, when they were discussing why they put those cards there, there was a certain formulaic approach in matching words on the cards to the claims. So clearly, some of the students were not really understanding what they were doing. They were just doing what we call a school. They were just doing school. They were matching statements. They were solving a task without necessarily engaging with the details of the ideas. But nevertheless, they have provided quite an extensive set of rationales for why they did what they did. And currently, actually, we're in the process of analyzing the fairly extensive amount of qualitative data that we have in terms of their reasoning. So this was yet another, I'll skip this, another approach to looking at how the students were performing in these classes of the teachers. So one approach that we've also taken is what we call perspective taking, and the challenges that presents for the students. So we had tasks for the students where they could consider the perspective of another person, and in some cases there would be no engagement, as you can see in this case, and the reasons provided may not be sufficiently grounded. But in some cases, we did get fairly nuanced approaches to taking perspective of other students in the task. So supporting certain points of view, but with a caveat or with some qualifiers, and providing a rationale for why different reasons might work for different purposes. So the work around perspective taking in the project has recently been accepted, and we have a paper in press about this aspect of students' argumentation. So there were different approaches to students' arguments in this case. So recognizing, for example, one argument as being stronger, but not agreeing with it, which was one of the outcomes of the data analysis. So I'm going to wrap up now, and just to say that, to summarize the key findings of our project, I think I cannot stress this enough again, that what we have done in this project was to move beyond silos of school subjects to foster cross-curriculum collaboration among science and RE teachers. And this is not a given. We were quite pleased with the fact that the teachers continued with the collaboration, and we were able to work with them even during the pandemic, the onset of the pandemic, which coincided with probably like 2/3 of way into our professional development agenda. We've seen that there's variation in the science and RE curricula and syllabi in relation to the coverage of argumentation. There is variation in terms of how science and RE teachers report about using pedagogical strategies to support argumentation and its teaching. And but nevertheless, we've seen evidence of collaboration between science and RE teachers in coordinating teaching and learning resources and activities in their lessons. We've conducted studies and generated evidence on how students engage in perspective taking and engage in big questions, and a range of other aspects of infusing argumentation in science and RE contexts, as I have explained. The pandemic has created a lot of challenges, as it did for everyone, because we couldn't complete the continuous professional development intervention with the teachers in the way that we wanted to. And as a result, also, we also couldn't actually visit the teachers in schools and collect some of the data in the way that we intended to collect. But nevertheless, I think that overall, we had encouraging outcomes with both teachers and students, and both teachers and students seem to appreciate what we've done in the project. We're also quite pleased that we've had some policy update of the project work in the recent Ofsted research review series on religious education. There has been references to some of our project publications, which was always encouraging as educational researchers to have some impact on policy and practice is what we do the research for. So this is also it's something that we appreciate. Apart from our academic publications, we've produced a series of practitioner oriented and public oriented publications and resources, and had a range of activities as part of the project. And these are that can range from podcasts and webinars, and an event like this today. Actually, what we're doing today is, I would consider, a part of our dissemination activities, even though the project has ended now. But it's always wonderful to be able to speak about our project and to share our experiences. So in conclusion, the motivation for us in doing this project was really multifaceted in terms of dealing with teachers and students' ability to engage with evidence-based reasoning, justification of knowledge claims in both science and RE, and in so doing, bringing together a nuanced approach to the debates about science and religion, and equipping future participants of society with skills to deal with misinformation and rationale for evidence-based claims. And we've used argumentation as a strategy to navigate such complexity between science and religions. And we've produced evidence from school-based research to illustrate how argumentation can mediate pedagogy and learning between science and RE. Now, in terms of implications of this line of work, we've seen that, there are many implications. I'll just highlight a couple here. One implication is that even though we've seen effectiveness of different modes of collaboration between science and RE teachers, we've seen how different approaches to collaboration between science and RE teachers. And I think we need more research to think about and to tease out what modes of collaboration might be most fruitful between science and RE teachers. And this is a question, an empirical question, and it requires research, further research with teachers to see what would be favorable types of collaboration between science and RE teachers beyond what we have seen in our project. And I think that similarly, we need further research on the professional development activities themselves. We've done the professional development activities ourselves, but I think we need further research on solidifying and clarifying the effectiveness of the different strategies that teacher trainers can use to promote interdisciplinarity and cross-subject collaborations. And finally, I think that we need a lot of engagement with different stakeholders, including curriculum developers and assessment designers, people who develop particularly high stakes assessments, because as I said earlier, we've worked with Key Stage 3 age group primarily because we wanted to avoid the exam pressures on the part of the teachers. And so then they were willing to experiment and trial different strategies, and they had that sense of freedom to do so. But I think in terms of curriculum recognition of the value of cross-disciplinary work, cross-subject collaboration between teachers, there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of thinking about the curriculum, but also the assessment, the consequences for assessment, because we know that teachers often teach to the test, understandably, because they're accountable for their students' outcomes. So there are a lot of implications for design of assessments that would target skills such as argumentation at the crossroads of science and RE. So here is the link to our website, www.orseducation.com, and you can see the resources and publications that we have produced in the project on that website. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions. Now I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me now? Oh,
I
good.
can hear you now.
Excellent. Well, let's hope everyone online can hear me as well. Let me begin by just by repeating for those of you who couldn't hear it. There was a real round of applause here in the auditorium, and I think people at home will be very grateful for a wealth of information that you gave us today, Professor Eduran, as well as pointing to the resources that you're making available to us. That's very useful indeed. And we have some quite interesting questions, and I want to start off with a sort of more general one here, which asks, generally, how did the science and the RE teachers interact with one another at the workshops? And did you come across any surprising, either positive or negative interactions?
Yes, so that alone is worthy of analysis. We have videotaped our workshops, and so I would only be talking about this in an anecdotal way at the moment, but I can share with you some observations. So I think one of the quite a striking observation for me was that when we put science and RE teachers in their subject groups to think about argumentation, we've seen that the RE teachers had a fairly sophisticated depiction of argumentation. And we've asked them to produce posters, and they produced a lot of, I mean, the posters were just, they had words written all over them. Whereas the science teachers' posters were fairly minimal, I mean, in terms of terminology used. But one of the moments where I realized the difference was that the RE teachers referred to different types of arguments, inductive argument, and the science teachers would ask, what is induction? And it's that sort of language around the theory of argument and argumentation that I think RE teachers would have encountered in their own education, which science teachers wouldn't necessarily have had. And so the language of argument and theory of argumentation seem to be more grounded in the background of the RE teachers. And I think this was one of the things that I think our professional development agenda capitalized on to foster. So likewise, there would have been differences in how the scientific knowledge might be perceived by the RE teachers. So I think that we approach this from the point of view of both subjects probably have strengths and some of the shortcomings in their own training in terms of the issues that we're covering. So we fostered that kind of ethos in the projects, that everyone had something to contribute from a different perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another general question here, wondering about whether, and you partially answered it during your talk, I think, but the question came up if you considered other religions and what were the key differences that came up in the research between the reactions to the teaching of different religions in comparison with teaching of science.
So we have, I think that most of the syllabi that we have covered included different religions, but the way that the teachers encountered designed, planned their lessons and taught their lessons was primarily dictated by the syllabi that they were following. And I know that the locally agreed syllabi may have differences in emphases relative to where the teachers would have been located. So, I think obviously, Christianity was covered in all of them, I believe. But in terms of the other religions, I think there was variation in the syllabi.
But did you discover any differences between the reactions between comparisons of questions coming up for Christianity as against Islam or Judaism, for example? Was there any differences in the reactions to the pupils?
We haven't actually looked at that specifically. It was not, I mean, you know, we can obviously look at it now or in retrospect, but we didn't, that wasn't part of the research questions in our project.
Okay, thanks. The questioner asks also a further question: could the pupils have responded better to the purely scientific tasks because the evidence might be clearer in science, whereas in religious education, it's more complex and multidisciplinary subject, which evokes personal emotions as well?
That's certainly a possibility. Yes, we did actually think about that as well. Actually, you know, yeah, I think that's plausible. But again, I think we need to test this and empirically to find out. Could I just respond to the, I see a comment also from Keith Tabor. Hi, Keith, as a colleague I know. So Keith is referring to some of the curricula that included argumentation.
Perhaps I could just explain to people who haven't seen it that the question is referring to some of the allusions to teaching of argumentation in the national curriculum as far back as 2007. So perhaps you'd like to comment on what the national curriculum was actually asking for at that time?
Yes, so I mean, historically in the science curriculum, there has been explicit reference to arguments and argumentation. So there was, for example, the ideas and evidence strand in the national science curriculum at some stage. And I think Keith is pointing to some of those periods when that did happen. But in the latest version of Key Stage 3 curricula, the Key Stage 3 curriculum, there isn't actually any reference. I've done this search myself just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So the explicit reference isn't there, but as I've highlighted in the presentation, there are indirect references to reasoning and justification and so on.
So are you optimistic that this research will lead to practical changes in the schools in the longer term?
There's certainly appetite among the teachers. So in that sense, I'm optimistic, but I think we need to engineer such collaborations to take place. I'm not sure that these collaborations will necessarily happen beyond perhaps some of the teachers who are interested in pursuing these questions. I think that teachers will need support and structures to ensure that these collaborations can take place. Right. But I am optimistic in the sense that I've seen the teachers had the appetite for it.
Good, good. Another question asks if you think that the science teachers are taught fewer argumentation encouraging techniques during their training, or such ambitions just squeezed out by their packed syllabus. Did science teachers reflect on this?
Yes, I mean, I think they, especially in contrast to RE, I think they became quite aware, because one of the things that they have realized in the project was through observations of their colleagues, they could see some of the different strategies that they were, the teachers of the other the RE colleagues were doing. So, but I think their sort of approach to what should be taught and this emphasis on the right and the wrong answer is quite strong for the science teachers. I mean, they would foster debate and discussion. They're willing to foster debate and discussion. But insofar as the correct scientific knowledge is communicated at the end, or eventually, so that students don't go away with misconceptions. I think that was really important for the science teachers.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to a live question here.
Yeah, thanks for your talk, Sibel. I have a background in science teaching, and I think you're right in that change in the science classroom comes about by changing the exam, because teachers rightly equip students with skills to pass their exams. So what interactions have you had with the exam board so far, and what did they make of your work?
Yes. I mean, the quick answer is that we haven't yet. So I have some links with some exam boards, and I've had a project involving an exam board, another project, and so we haven't really explored that option as yet. I mean, this is one thing that I'm highlighting as a subsequent stage potentially, but this is it's an important point, as you say, and but we'll need to explore it. We haven't yet, not formally anyway. Yeah.
Hello, is that better?
Yes, much
Good.
better.
Okay. So the question relates to the American context, and we wondered whether the question asks if you have any thoughts on how this research might apply to the unique context of teaching science and religion in the United States.
Yeah. So I mean, I think in the United States, I'm not sure that ARI is part of the school curriculum in many states. There might be differences across states. And there's certainly a lot of baggage in terms of teaching of evolution and creationism or intelligent design in the United States. And so, I mean, I think part of what we're trying to do in this project is to offer a constructive dialogue for teachers across the world, actually, but hopefully particularly to those who are in context where there might be tension. And in terms of building bridges and navigating a complexity of that is brought on by debates about science and religion, I think argumentation can be a useful and positive strategy for developing collaborations and fostering thinking in students as well. So I find their approach to be fairly nuanced in mediating dialogue between science and religion, and that's where I would bring in the project. And that's how I would enter the debate in the US context.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a more general question then. Clearly, teaching the two subjects, in a sense, requires different skills or different approaches, in the sense that, in one sense, persuasion might be an element in religious transmission of ideas. And I wonder if you've learned any lessons about how you can teach people, children or even adults, to distinguish rhetoric from reason, as it were, in the conveying of facts.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I mean, I think so. In a sense, I mean, this was a 3-year project which had a lot of different components of, looking at the curricula, fostering professional development of teachers, tracing the outcome on the pupils. So we had a lot of going on, and in diving into the topic of argumentation, we had to start somewhere, and the somewhere was something that would be intelligible to children eventually, to understand the components of an argument. But I think, the function of argumentation, or the outcome or purpose of argumentation, that would be, I would see that as a next step, maybe a subsequent project, once the students master this skill of recognizing the features of argumentation, to then think more broadly about what arguments do. So I think this is certainly something to explore in terms of different types of arguments, but we prioritized the components of learning the components of arguments for this age group in this project.
Thank you. Well, let me say thank you again to Professor Eduran for a very wide-ranging and challenging talk as well, and opening up her resources to us. Thank you too for those of you who sent in questions. It helps the seminar be appreciated more widely. So if you If this is your first visit to the Faraday seminar, let me repeat the welcome and say that you'd be very welcome to join us again in future weeks. And if you want to find out more about the Faraday Institute, then you could go to our, sign up to our newsletter, and you'll find access to that on the Faraday website. That's at faraday.cam.ac.uk. And just to advertise that in 2 weeks' time, on the 26th of October, our next webinar will be led by Dr. Joanna Leidenhag on the place of science among the sources of theology. So let me thank Professor Eduran again on behalf of everyone here and everyone out there. And we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all the useful questions.